IVM.
Have you invested in Super Saver funds on Paytm Money? These instant redemption liquid funds let you make withdrawals of your choice as and when the need arises. Upon redemption, the money gets credited to your account instantly within 30 minutes. It doesn't end here. The best part is that with similar flexibility, you get to earn relatively higher returns on your short-term investments than your regular bank accounts. These funds mostly invest in low-risk options to ensure the safety of your investments. Get ready to make the most out of your short-term savings. Download the Paytm Money app from the Play Store, get your KYC done, and become investment ready instantly to invest in the Super Saver funds. Folks, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. I'm your host Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter, and my guest today is Neha Singh, co-founder at Tracxn. Tracxn helps venture capital funds scout interesting startups and emerging sectors, and the analyst teams track millions of private companies across sectors and have market intelligence for their clients. And you guys are wondering, what am I doing? Why Tracxn in this episode? Well, so if you guys have been keeping track of Paisa Vaisa for the last couple of months, we've been focusing a lot on private markets. I've had Let's Venture Plus, Nimish Kampani. I have had Nitin Rao talking about the unlisted IPO space. I've always had a lot of startup founders also out here. Way back in 2017, we had done episodes with Anand Jain, for example, on this entire startup equation. And we've at Paisa Vaisa, as you know, we like to do a whole range of things for a whole big variety of audience. So why am I doing this episode? I just find the private market, or you can call it the startup and the founders and the VCs market, very, very interesting. It employs a lot of people. A lot of founders are also dependent on this. People working at startups are also interested in this. And then of course, there's a funding angle, the investing angle. So that's why I just love the space. I'm very thrilled to have a very unique guest, right? Because we don't usually get people of this stature on our show. So, without further ado, Neha, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners. Let's start with your background, and good Lord, it's impressive. Hey,
thanks a lot for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, look at this background. Yeah, Neha. IIT Bombay to BCG, that's Boston Consulting Group, right, to Sequoia, then an MBA at Stanford. So, what is it? How was it back then? Because Tracxn is really, okay, old is very relative in startup years. You started in 2013, we're in 2020. Take us back, take us way back, how this entire journey from IIT to the US, to the MBA at Stanford, and finally Tracxn. Walk us through that.
Sure. So I'm born and brought in Bombay. So IIT Bombay was my choice of college. So went there, did computer science in undergrad, and graduated in 2008. And my first job out of campus was the Boston Consulting Group. And, subsequently I spent 2 years there. And then I moved to Sequoia. Essentially, I wanted to be in the technology space, but more on the business side of it. And so
Sequoia is what, you went to the US or Sequoia out here in India?
In Mumbai, in the India office, yes, in the Mumbai office. Okay. And in fact, when I was in BCG, I did not know of venture capital as an asset class. This was in 2008 and 9. And
it didn't exist in a very big form at that time.
Yeah, exactly. The number of investments that used to happen in a year was so minuscule that even people out of IITs would not know that is a career option which exists. And I saw a few of my seniors doing in PEs, and VC was just starting to happen at that time. And luckily Sequoia happened. And obviously it's fairly active in terms of technology investing. One of the largest funds it has now become in India.
So what was this, just to put things in perspective, rolling back 10 years ago, what were the hot career choices there, and why did you choose this, off the beaten track kind of thing?
Interesting. So out of, so BCG was like a day one, a job out of campus. And the other options, I was considering actually 3 options. So I had interviewed with Google, which was in the Mountain View office. And then it was, then I was considering, the second option that I was considering was investment banking. So Goldman Sachs was the other job on campus, which was there. And then management consulting, BCG. So these were the three options that I was considering. And in Google, so I'd actually got the job offer in Google, but this was for the software engineer, and this was in Mountain View. But I wanted to go into tech, but not as a coder, but more on the business side of it. So, I think that is why BCG was sort of appealing in a sense that, it started you off with putting you right in the middle of businesses and projects working with large businesses.
Fantastic. Tell us about Tracxn. Of course, our listeners might not really know what exactly it is. So, folks, you might just want to go to the website. The website is Tracxn.com. I'll spell that for you. Tracxn.com. It's a market intelligence website. If I've described, actually, Neha, why don't you introduce Tracxn to us?
Sure. Yeah. So easy way to think about it is if you are looking at investing in the public markets, you have a lot of platforms like Bloomberg. When you're looking at investing in the private markets, especially in the technology space, that is where Tracxn comes in. So today we track the largest number of private companies in emerging technology sectors globally. Right. So that's in brief of Tracxn. And
Tracxn, guys. I'm sorry. I think I've made a bit of a blunder on the pronunciation of Tracxn, but I was on the X Tracxn, but Tracxn. Got it. Yeah. Sorry.
Go well. And just to brief about how we started. So while I was an investor in the technology space, unlike the public markets wherein you have a lot of data about companies, in private markets there is a lot of information asymmetry, and this was 9 years back. And to give you a simple example, if you're looking at just companies in online education, you feel that is an interesting sector that you want to invest in. Just to find out all the companies that exist in India in that space used to be a task. So it used to be like a week-long task. And imagine if you have to find out online education companies globally and compare it. Then someone will have to spend a lot of time just collating information. Other things like, for instance, I want to find out all companies coming out of IIT Bombay alums. That is used to be a lot of work. Secondly, if you're looking at a particular company and you want to look at, what is a comparable set? So a good example is that there are a lot of companies in India which are now having products for the global market, right? Examples being a Freshdesk or of a browser stack, right? So if you're looking at a cross-border testing market and you want to look at, okay, who all exists globally, that used to be a non-trivial task, right? So essentially, and what has happened in the last decade or so is private market, which used to be a small portion of LP allocation, that has become more center stage. That has also become, that has increased in terms of the number of underlying companies as well as the total AUM. So now that this asset class has become large, there are so many people tracking it. They're required to be sort of a platform to help you track that. And essentially our idea was very simple that, can we use technology to help build an information platform for private companies, right? So that is how we started off with.
It is. I was just, so listeners, just some background. I was actually doing some work on the education sector for some work of mine, and I actually wanted to get the data that Neha just mentioned right now. And all of whatever I wanted was in one place in exactly the format that I wanted, which was basically the top 3 or 4 startups out there, the funding that they got, when they got it, and probably some names of the founders and stuff like that. So the information is very useful. And it works on both the sides, right? Because we're going to get into that right now. When I say both sides, one side being the venture capitalists themselves, the investors themselves, and the other side being the founders. Both of them need this data. Am I right in that?
Yes, that is correct. So we cater more to the investors, and we cater more to. So there are 2 key use cases that we today solve. So one is your investors, which help you do private market investing, and the second one is your large corporates who are looking at innovative companies in their industries. So that is there. And for founders, we actually don't charge. So founders are, sort of more we extend because they are in the ecosystem and they are looking at it. But primary user case is your private market investors and large corporates.
So let's jump into that, Neha. Tell us, how has this entire crisis progressed so far? Because if I remember correctly, last year, somewhere in 2019 itself, a lot of the bigger venture capitalist guys were saying that winter is coming and funding is going to freeze up. And so was this, a perfect storm that was going to hit us any which way, and COVID has just pushed us right into it? Just give us an overview as to what's been happening.
Right. So you are actually correct that, since end of 2019, you had started hearing from people that the late stage rounds especially had kind of slowed down and a lesser number of those are happening. But obviously, something like COVID, no one would have anticipated. And that has changed a lot of assumptions of people and changed a lot of perspectives. So even if you were to see during this crisis, so there was a little bit slowdown, I think, but if you see Q1 and Q2, you can actually see the number of rounds. If I just talk about India, for instance, you can see that the number of rounds have decreased and the total overall funding has also decreased. To give you an example, typically in a quarter, there used to be somewhere between 450 to 500 rounds every quarter. And that has become closer to 300, in the last 2 quarters. So that has decreased, and the overall funding has also decreased. Excluding obviously Geo. If you take Geo, then Geo alone has probably taken the amount of funding that the whole ecosystem used to get in about 2 years plus. They have raised collectively nearly 20 billion now, which is fairly standard. So if you exclude that amount of funding, and if you were to take for all the other startups, then the recent quarters have slowed down, yes, a bit because of through COVID.
Okay, let's look at this from both the sides of the equation. Okay, so first I want you to give us an idea about the venture capital funds. Right now, a lot of rich people, investors, HNIs, ultra HNIs, billionaires, whoever they are around the world, basically the investors who who put in money with in these VC funds. Some of them might have just have idle cash on the sidelines, and this crisis would have provided them a great time because valuations would be low. So, what is your sense? That have VCs been able to raise money from their clients during this crisis? Is anyone at all willing to see this as an opportunity to actually start a new fund?
So, from the VC's perspective, I think the initial, so as COVID, the whole pandemic began, the initial couple of months were more ambiguous because people did not know what to expect. So you could see a little bit of pause in investments that is happening, a little bit of pause in the operations that is happening because people didn't know what to expect. This was probably in March and April when this was just starting. So people didn't know whether, you have to think about it from a quarter or you have to think about it from longer. But now I think things are more clear that this is going to last for long, and I think right now deals have still have again sort of started happening. So you can still see a lot of deals activity that is happening in the early stage, that is in the angel seed stage as well as in the later stage. Right? So you see that what has happened, I think, is that there are some sectors which have become prioritized over others. So if you're on the wrong side of the curve, then obviously that is a tough time. For instance, if you're in the travel segment or if you're in any segment which has any offline component to fulfill, that is tough. On the other hand, if you are in a sector that is benefited out of COVID and the structural changes that it has brought, then your evaluations are sort of probably on the higher side because you're seeing also a lot of user metrics increase.
Okay. So I want to get to exactly what you were saying, which is which among the startups, among the sectors, and since you mentioned early stage has actually seen some action. Let's get into some of that action. Maybe a few deals that you want to talk to us about, and after that, which are the winners, people who were just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, and people who are in the offline space, who've just had a really bad time being in the wrong place.
Right. So if you're talking about, so let's start with some of the sectors which are sort of, now it's more clear that, this is going to last for some time. Definitely 2020, and people are now seeing when in 2021 are things going to open up. So a lot of the changes of work from home, etc., that is going to continue. So with this, with this scenario now, let's talk about, sort of what are the sectors which are seeing good user, also seeing investments that are happening. So I'll probably, there's also actually a coverage area that we have started, a set of about some 15 coverage areas that we have started, because these were also sectors that people wanted to see the companies in.
Okay.
So these were some of the sectors which are seeing obviously underlying user engagement also increase. So to name some of them, one which is very obvious is because of your work from home, your whole remote work tools, which includes not just your Zoom or GeoMeet type of tools, but also other ones like you want to do a whiteboarding solution, have a discussion with your team. Now your team is basically spread out. Do you want to do time tracking solutions? So a lot of companies which have come up in this. There is also activity which is happening globally. Then in healthcare, there are companies coming up in telemedicine. In fact, I myself have actually used like a telemedicine solution which I had never used, ever in the last month.
Which one was that? How? What? Because
So
I in fact just used Practo a few days ago for a very minor health issue, and I was like, okay, this might actually work, and it's 24/7, so I could just ping a doctor and boom, I got it. So what is yours like?
So I actually tried out multiple. So I actually tried out Practo, I tried out Mfine, I tried out CureFit. I wouldn't name which one was successful or not, but yeah, in two of them I did not get a good response. In one of them, the doctors did not join, and there were too many questions for onboarding. In one, which really worked well, so that is great. So I was able to. So for me, I think I'm now a user of telemedicine, which I had never been, and I could actually talk to a doctor which was in Bangalore, which is great. So that is one, yeah.
Okay, go on.
Area which is there. Another area which you also probably hear a lot of people talking about is like at-home fitness.
Okay.
People are in now, because they are not going out as much, they are not playing out as much. So your at-home yoga, at-home fitness videos, which are through videos or through personalized, different levels. There are companies coming up in it. Again, globally in China and US. Then the third theme, which is large, is again education.
Big one. My own kid is like, he's actually, so there I don't understand one thing, but I won't get you into that, which is that parents grip so much about screen time. But right now, there's the only way to give them education here, so give them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's poor kids. Actually, they have to, I think, strain their eyes out, especially the younger folks. But I think there's no other option which is there. Either you skip it. Actually, in fact, just now, I think there was this news of Vedantu raising another 100 million. Right. So, education is another sector which is also seeing a lot of growth, which is by obvious reasons happening. Related to that is, parents wants to keep their kids busy, so they want to have hobby classes online. How do you keep kids busy? I think that's like a main topic of conversation.
It is. Come on, if you have working parents at home, they're already working from home. They are trying to manage I don't know how many things at the same time, and then to have your kid running after your life, it's right. Okay.
So that is
So these are three. So let me just recount. Let me just recap that for listeners. The first one you said was working from home tools. It could be whiteboards, could be video. Video meet stuff like that. That was the first big one. Second, you said was the education. The education was third. Second was fitness.
Healthcare, which includes telemedicine, at-home fitness.
Tell me one thing. For the others that who are outside of these top three, who might still be doing well, because a lot of people are now saying that if I could not deliver my product through offline channels to you, I could be a beverage, I could be a food product, I could be a pets thing. We are now trying to go to online channels. I'll go through a Swiggy, I'll go through something else. So for these people who are not lucky enough to be in the top three, are you seeing anything on the valuation front when they want to raise money? People are saying that, okay, I need money right now. Why don't I just take a call on my valuations and raise whatever money I can? Is that a trend that's happening right now?
So that is a little bit dicey. It depends on some of the investors which are there, which are already backers. What we have seen is that some of the rounds which were in discussion pre-COVID, that got completed, because despite some of the things happening, I think some of the rounds which are already in progress in diligence phase, that got completed. But the second thing is that if you are now starting to talk to an investor afresh, That's a little difficult if you're on the other side. If investors feel that it is going to have a negative impact, obviously people have been able to sort of adapt and get sort of adapt to the changes infrastructure, and then get the online component, remove any component which is offline. To actually give you a good example is, for instance, fintech firms which had any component of physical signing that required from people, their operations was completely paused because during the lockdown you cannot meet the people. They have sort of moved to eKYC wherever that's possible. So they have also integrated that. So you can see sort of companies also adopt to that, and if you're able to adopt, if you're able to sort of do, then the investors also wants to see some proof point, and then you are probably, so early stage I think are still happening, but probably for the later stage I think people want to sort of see that unfold, and then it's happening. So yes, I do see there would be some sort of pressure on the later stage, and in case you have a shorter runway, then you might be open to also sort of negotiating on the valuation depending on the capital. So there are some of the investors who are also looking at, which are more on the PE offline space, which are also looking for sort of good valued assets which are there in the market.
Fine. So, folks, we are going to take a small break out here. On the other side of this break, we'll go to the other side of the table, which is from the founder's perspective. We'll figure out, what exactly are founders saying, what are they talking, where are they going for money, how are they managing to survive in these very difficult times. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Neha Singh, co-founder at Tracxn. Neha, did I get the pronunciation right? Tracxn?
Perfect.
Thank you. Folks, we'll be right back.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. Some really fun guests on the network this week. Cyrus welcomed Dia Mirza to come and have a conversation about all kinds of different things. Danny Morrison was on Edges and Sledges, the cricket podcast. If you haven't heard that, that's always a fun listen. And Raul Subramanian was on Football Should Fall to grow their ever more exciting list of guests. And it's not just that. Mantra Mugdha, old friend of ours, was on Advertising is Dead. Manu Pillai was on the Filter Coffee podcast. It's been one great guest after the other. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
And welcome back to this episode of Paisa Vaisa. My guest, Neha Singh, co-founder at Tracxn. In the first half of this episode, we were talking about the investors' side, which are the hot sectors which have actually done well during this crisis. Let's move this now to a founder's equation. Yeah, talk to us about that. Let's start off with, how have founders managed so far? What's been your experience? What, when you have conversations with them, or if you've been talking with them, for people who are not lucky enough to find sudden massive uptake in their service, not everyone is a Byju's, not everyone is a topper, not everyone is probably a fitness app. How has the experience been so far? Because even with massive, with large startup like a Zomato or Swiggy, there was this phase, I think March, April, where things literally went to zero. Now, then of course, they kind of adapted. Some of them moved to delivering groceries. Swiggy, for example, has a delivery service for anything from documents to medicines. So how have these guys survived? What's been the story so far?
Right. I think March was probably the most tough because, everyone was like the lockdown happened and everyone was started encountering for the first time. Another big issue was that, everyone was moving to work from home. And for large teams, if you have a good setup, then that is easy. But for a lot of team, just the setting up of infrastructure, which is, having your whole team a good laptop, good internet connectivity wherever they are, setting that up, that required some amount of effort. So for instance, in our case, we have a 700 member team. And in our case, actually, what we had done is we had sort of anticipated that this is, luckily, now in hindsight, we had anticipated that, this looks like this is going to last for some time. Okay. And, there are a lot of repercussions. So for instance, in our case, a lot of our team members used to live in PGs because they're fairly young. And PGs were going to get closed. Because they had to have some social distancing, etc. norms, and some of the other. The other issue was that people used to go out to eat, especially a lot of people who are single. Instead of cooking, they would actually go out to eat, and now that whole infrastructure is not there.
Those guys took off all the Maggie from all the. Wait, jokes apart. What problem?
Yeah.
These are actual things that you don't make a big deal of. But when you think about it, roti kapda makan, okay, kapda to is taken care of. Food, you're right. If you're a single guy in a PG, where do you figure out your food? And the infra part is fascinating. So you're saying that, so okay, obviously not everyone has their own laptop, and internet. I thought by now would be sorted. So internet is still, was it an issue back then? How did you guys get around solving this?
Yeah, so that was not trivial. What we had done is we had actually encouraged people to go to their hometowns, because we realized that this is going to take time, and even if they're staying inside, like your apartment, for them to like be cooking 3 times a day and managing everything without any support, that is going to be tough. So for a lot of them, it was actually much more convenient that they are in their hometowns, so that they have at least the basic infra sort of taken care of. And and the other thing what has happened is that if people are living alone and they're not meeting anyone, then it's also a little bit depressing. You're not going out, you're not meeting people physically. It can be a little bit depressing for people. In office, you are there, you at least meet 50 folks in the whole day. So that was interesting. And what we had realized is, actually we now realize that even people in remote towns were able to log in very efficiently. And now I'm sort of a believer of this whole infrastructure which Geo has helped sort of set up, which is having good internet connectivity even in like your tier 3 cities. So luckily for us, we obviously had, because we are in the 7th year as a company, we had a sort of a good infra for people to work. So that was already set up. So for us, the transition was fairly smooth. I think only the infrastructure part that needed to be set up. So that was probably one thing which required a little bit of mindshare in March, which is how do you get everything set up and how do you maintain operations. For instance, we did not have any disruption in operations. We have customers in 40 different countries, so we work across all the time zones. So we also had to ensure that that round the clock support, round the clock thing is the team is working. So that was one. And the second thing is, obviously now I think everything is sort of more predictable. So now people have sort of set up their infra to do that. But there are obviously other things that people are tracking more closely. So one is, you are as a business, you are tracking not just how your top line sort of looks like, that you are obviously tracking on a daily basis, but you also tracking a little bit of underlying sort of metrics that help you identify if anything were to happen beforehand. To give you a simple example is that something that you may not expect is that if you have a lot of SME customers, then even if you are signing them up, but if you see any delay in cash collection, that is going to impact. Or the second thing is that if they are not unable to pay the GST on time, then that liability is basically on you, right? Yeah. So you have to actually track a lot of leading indicators also as a company, because you don't know what part might be impacted.
Yeah, there's so many moving parts to this.
Yeah. Right. And I think there were one or two interesting ones that had also come about. So for instance, treasury, which you were to feel that, oh, that's like, obviously very obvious, but you had this whole Franklin issue in between, right? And if depending on, if companies are not able to pay their debt on time, then that is going to have impact on the debt funds. And if you have any exposures on the little bit more aggressive debt funds in that, then that might have impact. So you actually had to start looking out for all these other things as well, just to make sure everything is sane.
Understood. And even from an investor's perspective, that if he had invested in any of those funds that were closed down, then obviously that money is stuck out there, and to that extent your liquidity is constrained,
right,
to a very large extent. Let's take this conversation a little bit further from the founders' perspective. What are you hearing? How many months of cash do founders in general have? I mean, not the lucky ones, of course, who are who have seen funding rounds and therefore managed to add to their runway. But for the more average guys, where are they right now? What are they saying? Hopefully, their situation has improved, because some amount of operations have come back online. How is the general scene on liquidity, cash in hand, and runway ahead?
Yeah. So people are generally becoming a little conservative and are preparing. So, for instance, if you are if you are doing well, then obviously people are still going to investors and starting a process. But if you are not looking to start a process, then people are getting a little conservative because it may take some time for things to stabilize. And people are doing a lot of other things as well. So, for instance, conserving cash, like your office lease, which used to be like a good safe asset. You do office lease. A lot of them have actually given up in case you have a short-term lease because you're not going to occupy it for at least 9 months of this calendar year, if not more. So that is one. Unfortunately, in some of them, you heard about layoffs in some of the businesses which had been impacted, obviously. That is one. But I think right now people are sort of planning and planning as if playing a little conservative because they think that markets might be back by either the end of the year or Q1 of next year.
Okay. You spoke about layoffs. Let's talk about it from an employee perspective. How has it been for them? Have there been large layoffs in ad startups? How are people managing? Are they looking around? Because I know from my Twitter, the retweets that I see, people that I follow, a lot of people have put out that, okay, I'm so and so, I can do this, I can do coding, I can do writing, I can do this, I can do that. So how has that? How has a broader employment scene been within the startups?
So if you are if your startup is in a segment like a travel or this, obviously you are impacted more, and they had to take a tough call. And this is true globally, not just for India. You saw for Airbnb, you saw Uber, you saw sort of massive layoffs that is happening in these sectors globally. But at the same time, on the other hand, you do see hiring. So your other online education companies or your gaming companies, which are also generating a lot of cash lately, they are sort of hiring. Obviously, the overall capacity has probably not reached back. There are a lot of people that that may be unfortunately not be employed. Especially, I would say the more sort of staff, which is your cleaning staff, for instance, right? Like the large agencies which are there in all these. I would also say that they have been impacted, but I would say that overall, there are still segments which are sort of hiring, and which is there. It might. So the second thing which has happened is probably earlier there was a lot of salary inflation that was happening in some of the sectors. That has probably become lesser.
Okay. Last question. Where does this go? Where does this end? Where do you ever think that things are I don't like to use the word new normal, so I'm just going to go with normal. What's your timeline for this entire thing, going by the people that you speak to or whatever you've seen so far?
Yeah. So interestingly, that answer, keeps changing. So if you would have asked me this question 2 months back, that answer would have been different. And today it's different. Today, interestingly, from most of the people that we speak to, it looks like, 2020 is definitely work from home for most of the companies. And now you are seeing, which part, it's either Q1 or Q2 in 2021 that things are going to be back. And that all depends on whether there's a second wave, how big is the second wave, if there's a third wave which is going to happen. It all depends on that. So Europe has surprisingly not had the large second wave, but unfortunately in US, which has panned out, you can see most of the people over there are not going to go to office. In fact, I was just speaking to a friend in New York yesterday who was actually in office. So New York has, of all cities, has bounced back. They're going to offices. The offices have opened. It's still optional for people, but people have started going. So that is the brighter side, that that it can become normal within a few months. So that is great.
Yeah, and Southeast Asia seems to be, I don't know, they weren't as badly affected as any other part of the world.
Right. So Singapore, offices are open. So that is great. But unfortunately, looks like at least in Bangalore, cases are increasing. So, until it plateaus, people are still not sure of, whether there will be a second wave or when will that flatten. So I think now it looks like at least 2020 is going to be work from home.
Yeah. Anything for the employees out there, anything for people working in startups, any tips on how to survive, what to do, just how to just gear themselves up if this is going to last for a long time. How does one really battle this crisis and come out of it?
Sure. So one thing is that there are a lot of sectors which are actually having good user increase. For instance, as I was saying, gaming is a sector, very sectors that you may not think about content consumption. So there are definitely companies in these sectors that would be expanding, that are growing. So those are sort of good options, which is there in case you were on the other side. And the second thing is that, this thing is going to last for long. So you better set up a good, comfortable infra for your working day to day. Set up your mini office inside your homes, inside, wherever you're comfortable in. And I think the main thing that people are actually now talking about is, people should not be getting bored, right? Like your whole team, especially people who are starting now, they're not able to meet their folks physically. I think that is one of the main challenges in a team, that how do you sort of bond and stay connected. One interesting thing that you should definitely try out in a team is poker games. That really helps to for your bonding, because you're typically spending most of the Zoom calls for work, and all the offline chats that you used to happen, chats over lunch or over coffee that used to be happening with people, that may not be happening. So you should definitely have these kind of events with your teams. Do any sort of games. Poker is one of the things that we have that has turned out to be pretty fun. With your team to actually do that whole bonding.
I thought you'd say Ludo or Housey or something, because that's also something that's become quite popular, it seems.
That may also be very good options. I haven't just tried out, but I should.
Great, yeah. So folks, on that positive note of how to survive during this crisis, much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Anupam.
Listeners, if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on IVM Network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, I am B50 on Twitter. Thank you so much for listening to Paisa Vaisa.
No material on the show should be considered as financial advice. The material on the show is for informational purposes only. Please consult a financial advisor before taking any investment decision.
Are you looking for India's most awesome cricket podcast? Are you now tired of listening to the same old guys drone on about cricket everywhere? Edges and Sledges is a weekly cricket podcast hosted by 3 fans of the game, Varun, DJ, and myself, Ashwin. It was established in early 2018, has over 60 episodes now, and is of course now proud to be on the IVM Podcast Network. Each week, we get together from 3 different time zones, the USA, the UK, and Singapore, and we talk about things from the world of cricket, with a focus on Indian cricket. We often interview special guests from all around the world, including former cricketers and cricket media personalities. So check out Edges and Sledges, the cricket podcast, now on the IVM Network.
रिश्ते में तो हम तुम्हारे पॉडकास्ट लगते हैं. नाम है फुटबॉल शुटबॉल.
Presenting Football Shortball, a show about 3 friends discussing our favorite game over a beer. Sometimes 3, maybe even 5. Hi, I'm Shiva, and with me are my 2 sidekicks, Gaurav Sapre and Karthik Iyer.
Sidekick? You mean like Batman's Robin or Van Persie Robin?
No, I mean like Alexis Sanchez, but with a little more skill than just playing the piano.
Ha! Just shows how the best players at Arsenal are mere bench warmers at United.
Oh, thank you, Iyer. But you're a Fulham supporter, so whenever you say anything to support me, I question my beliefs.
Just like how Griezmann would say, एक बार मैंने जो decision ले लिया, तो मैं अपने आप की भी नहीं सुनता.
Banter aside, we will talk match reports, transfer rumors, top controversies, fantasy football picks, and so much more. So grab a beer and tune in to Football Shootball every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.